This is WPTS. Welcome to the Story Hour. Tonight's story, Munich 1919, written by Rand Richards Cooper. Our program is sponsored by the Bushnell and the Mark Twain House and Museum.
It was well after 8 when the first speaker rose, and S., owner of the Sterneke Bräukeller, stood behind the bar. He surveyed the crowd, the usual grimy workers, the unemployed clerks masquerading as professors, but also, tonight, a few men in collars and cravats, men who really could be Professoren. Already, S. had sold 19 plates of sausage, and appetites showed no sign of flagging. If he ran short of fresh sausages, he could substitute smoked ones. People listening to orators, even such paltry orators as these, paid less attention to what was on their plates. He served another verse teller. Each plate meant another 50 pfennigs coming in, and S needed every last one. He owed the butcher money, and if the weather got cold, he would soon owe somebody for coal. During the war, one had accepted such shortages, but now the war had been over for a year, the government fallen, and the Kaiser fled, and things had scarcely improved. At the front of the room, the speaker addressed his audience in a wheedling voice on the evils of capitalism. S. thought, "Show me the lecture I can eat and drink, and I will happily step to the table." He idly scanned the audience and spotted the cross-eyed machinist, and near him, the captain who had had his nose shot off at Ypres, a face like a bad dream. There were dozens of such groups afoot in Munich, from Spartacists and anarchists to Freikorps thugs. S. let them all come, as long as they paid and didn't wreck anything. Business was business, whatever the politics. Beer isn't black or red, he told his wife. Verse turns equally left and right. S. stood at the bar, topping off a row of Pilsners. There were sounds he liked to listen for as he worked. The clanging bell of the streetcar outside in the Lendenstrasse. The clop of a horse's hoof. The birds that twittered at sunset in the tiny yard out back. The birds sang and sang, oblivious to whether things went well for humans or badly. S. envied their heedlessness. Tonight he was listening also for the putt-putt of Joachim, the boy next door on his motorized bicycle. Joachim spent his mornings running newspapers all over town and the rest of the day organizing things. Earlier, S. had sent him out to organize some potatoes. It was yet another evil that had come back from the war. The traffic in phantom supplies, the bribes and rumors, and the sudden unexplained absence or presence of things. But S. needed potatoes. And so, all evening, he had been listening for the putt-putt in the yard. Back in the kitchen, his wife stood at the counter slicing radishes. Behind her, a coil of sausages sizzled in a pan on the stove. "So, who is saving the world this time?" she spoke without looking up. "I believe they call themselves the German Workers' Party." She glanced up, and he knew what she was thinking. There was surely less work represented in that entire room than the two of them together did in a day. "Has the boy come by?" "Haven't seen him." "Well, maybe he got his hands on something good out there. Maybe he's been organizing a little surprise for us." S. showed his wife what he hoped was a cheerful smile. He watched her spear a sausage from the pan with a fork, shake it off onto a plate, and array alongside it radish slices, mustard, and finally a roll. "A Kaiserbrötchen," she said, handing it to him, "for the German worker." Emerging into the smoky room, he saw that Feder had given way to Herre. Herre wrote in the so-called nationalist papers, grimy broadsides that blamed Jews and Bolsheviks for everything. The man went about half-shaven, in a filthy suit coat, and he limped, a twisted club foot that sent him bobbing across the room like a rag tossed into the sea. The squinter, the limper, the captain without a face. Perhaps they should call themselves the German Cripples Party, S reflected. Circling, he collected a tray full of beer glasses and returned to the counter to wash them, as Herr launched into his talk, reading from a rumpled sheet of paper. I should like to discuss the following theme, he began. Who is responsible for the World War? S concentrated on washing glasses. He knew too well the membership of the groups who spent their evenings in beer halls and restaurant cellars like his. Most were mere boys from the neighborhood, and pathetic boys at that. The ones who had bad skin and stuttered, or who hated their fathers but cowered before them, who were desperate for a uniform. Then there were the thugs, soldiers from the front, grown cruel on violence and living for revenge alone. And finally came the so-called leaders, failed professors who toddled with ideas like toys, waving their pamphlets, and quaking with joy at the unexpected good fortune of having finally found an audience upon whom to spew out their visions of a new Germany. It was all just talk, empty phrases that brought nothing. The weakling, the professor, and the thug, they were about as likely to create that new Germany as a pig was to fly. He had no use for idle chatter. In times such as these, one had to work more, not less. A member of the audience stood up, a ridiculous figure in a greasy frock coat and drooping mustaches, who introduced himself as Professor Dr. Baumann. As he did, S heard through the back window the sputtering cough of Joachim's motorcycle. He removed his timepiece from his vest pocket. Nearly 10. A smile came to his face as he pictured the machine, its sidecar full with potatoes, and on top of that something extra, whatever it was that had been keeping Joachim out. The fruit of a night's digging through Munich. The boy was clever, S reminded himself. He knew when a thing was worthwhile. There remained the round of beer glasses to fill, and he did it at a leisurely pace, savoring the mystery prize awaiting him in the other room. Who knew what it might be? A wireless radio apparatus? An overcoat for his wife? Such thoughts were grandiose, he knew. But he allowed himself the pleasure nonetheless. S draped his dish towel over his forearm and went back through the swinging door into the kitchen. His wife stood at the wash basin, scrubbing a pan. In the corner, potatoes were piled like stones. The boy himself was nowhere to be seen. So, said S. No secret surprise from the black flea markets? His wife harumphed. Oh, well, he sighed. I confess it, I was dreaming of a radio hidden in those potatoes. Potatoes? She looked at him. Where do you see potatoes? Frowning, S proceeded to the pile by the door. Stone by stone, he lifted them, and every last one was wrong. They were too big, too round. The skin held a violet tint. He cut into one with his fingernail and looked at the pale meat. How lovely, he said, tossing it back. A heap of turnips. His wife shrugged. Perhaps can someone tell me what I am supposed to do with a heap of turnips? The usual. Cook them, peel them, eat them, serve them. He stared at her. But these are turnips. Who am I now, the turnip king of Munich? S felt his face swelling and reddening. He looked toward the back door. No wonder he ran out of here like a thief. His wife turned to him. He is a boy, she said. You told him to get something and he got something. You should thank him. He held up a hand to quiet her. Listen here. These are turnips. He managed in a throttled voice, then turned and pushed back through the swinging door and into the restaurant. Incredibly, the mustachioed professor was still droning on. to the rustling impatience of his audience. S started in, again with washing glasses, trying to shut out the man's voice and get himself under control. But he was shaking, and as he stared down at his hands rooting about in the gray water, he thought of men sleeping on park benches and pawning their overcoats for food. Doctors everywhere who refused to see you unless you brought a brick of coal for the stove. He shuddered to think of himself, stupid with optimism, plodding along day after day, dumb as a cart horse. And now here stood this so-called professor, resembling nothing so much as a drunken coachman, promoting his grand solution. Bavaria should remove itself from the Reich and attach itself to Austria. Ha! S imagined hurling a beer stein at him, then another and another, till every last glass lay in bits. A commotion in the room interrupted his thoughts. A man in a worn, dark blue suit had risen and stood rebuking the professor in vehement tones. To leave Germany for Austria was senseless, he charged, a finger aimed in the professor's face. Anyone claiming otherwise was a fool or a traitor. We don't want a smaller Reich. That is the logic of the enemy. A German is a German wherever he is. And wherever he is, there is Germany. See here, Professor Baumann started. But the speaker in the blue suit pushed his objections aside like so much plowed earth. Jawohl, someone in the audience called out. Others chimed in until, amid a general buzz of scorn, the professor gathered up his hat and skulked out the door. The new speaker moved a few steps toward the front, allowing S a better look at him. His hair was neatly parted, face pink and soft-looking for a man clearly in his 30s, mustache clipped in a comical toothbrush style. S recalled him from earlier, asking politely for water instead of beer. Now he spoke, and as he did, a certain stiffness in his bearing seemed to melt away. Every day poses a new insult to Germany. Black African troops, brought by the French, consort openly with German women. As for the so-called Republic in Weimar, what can you expect from a government with a saddler's apprentice for a chancellor and a constitution written by a Jew? Ladies and gentlemen, these are deliberate provocations. These are insults to the greatness of Germany. The speaker hectored the audience, lofting his words in a curious manner, as if addressing not 36, but 3,000. There was something in the man's voice, a low rumble that rolled and trilled, rising, hanging on the high notes with a liquid, almost musical quality. S watched him gesture, raising a hand with fingers curled as if holding an invisible goblet. His hand was graceful, its fingers long and womanly. And the man himself seemed to look at it for a long instant with fascination. Then he crushed it into a fist. Things cannot continue in this way, he shouted, glowering at his listeners. To German misery there is one answer only: German will and German iron. The pale eyes shone with a raging sorrow, face flushing, and for a moment S thought the man would weep tears of pure conviction. Behind them, the kitchen door swung open, and out came his wife. What in God's heaven is all this hullabaloo? She looked over to the wild-eyed speaker, haranguing the crowd. Who is this little puppet supposed to be? S said nothing. He was distracted by a sensation of something moving outward from the man in the blue suit and into the assembled listeners, pouring into their glistening, upturned faces as from a pitcher into empty glasses. His wife turned to him. And you? What will you eat when you have swallowed this silliness? They were S's own words, thrown back in his face. Show me the lecture I can eat and drink, and I will happily step to the table. But instead of answering, he put a finger to his lips to quiet her. And drying his hands on his dish towel, stepped from behind the counter.